The stars burned cold above the fortress world of Kethris Prime as Captain Marcus Cole studied the massive structure through his tactical visor. The forbidden fortress rose from the black stone plains like a nightmare-given form, its spires reaching toward the poisoned sky like grasping claws. No army had ever breached its walls. No species in the galactic community had even survived approaching its outer defenses. But tonight, human soldiers would try what none had dared before. Marcus turned to face his company. 300 men and women stood in the shadow of a dead mountain, their breath forming clouds in the frigid air. They wore the gray and blue of the United Earth military, their faces painted with determination and fear in equal measure. They were young mostly, volunteers who had signed up knowing this mission was likely their last. "Listen up," Marcus said, his voice carrying through their helmet communications. "The Vorthen have held this galaxy in terror for 2,000 years. Every species has paid tribute. Every world has bowed. The Council told us it was impossible to fight them. They said we should surrender like everyone else did." He paused, letting his words sink in. "We said no." A ripple of agreement passed through the ranks. Humanity had only joined the galactic community 5 years ago, and in that time they had learned a terrible truth. The Vorthen were not just conquerors. They were farmers of fear. They fed on the terror of other species, growing stronger with each civilization they crushed. The Forbidden Fortress was their seat of power, the source of the psychic technology that let them project fear across the stars. "The Council thinks we're fools," Marcus continued. "They think we're sending ourselves to die. Maybe they're right, but here's what they don't understand about humans." He pointed toward the fortress. "We know fear. We've lived with it our whole existence. We're afraid of the dark, of heights, of death, of each other. Every day we wake up afraid. And every day we get up anyway. We go to work. We raise our families. We build our lives. Because humans learned a long time ago that courage isn't the absence of fear. It's choosing to move forward despite it." Lieutenant Sarah Tanaka stepped up beside him. She was young, barely 25, but she had already proven herself in 3 engagements against Vorthen raiding parties. Her face was calm, almost serene. "Captain, scouts report the outer wall patrols are changing shift in 15 minutes. Marcus nodded. "That's our window. Everyone knows their assignments. First squad takes the eastern wall. Second squad provides covering fire. Third squad follows me through the main gate once it's open." He looked at each of them one last time. "If we fail tonight, Earth will burn. The Vorthen have promised it. They've made us an example before the whole galaxy, the foolish young species that dared to resist. So we're not just fighting for ourselves. We're fighting to show every slave world out there that the Vorthen can be beaten, that their fear is a lie." Private James Rodriguez, barely 18 and fresh from the training camps of South America, raised his hand. "Sir, what happens if we actually win?" Marcus allowed himself a small smile. "Then we change everything." The assault began exactly on schedule. First squad moved like shadows across the black stone plains, using every depression and rock formation for cover. The Vorthen had grown complacent over millennia of unchallenged dominance. Their sensors were designed to detect the approach of armies, not small units moving in the dark. Sergeant Chen Wei led the climb up the eastern wall, her magnetic climbing gear finding purchase in the ancient stone. Behind her, 12 soldiers followed in a silent chain. The wall was 300 meters tall, and the cold threatened to freeze their fingers even through their insulated gloves. Halfway up, Private Morrison slipped. His magnetic anchor failed, and for one terrible moment he hung by one hand, his legs kicking in empty air. The soldier above him, Corporal Sandra Diaz, reached down without hesitation. She grabbed his wrist and pulled, straining every muscle until he found his footing again. "Thanks," Morrison gasped through the calm. "Thank me when we're done," Diaz replied. They reached the top of the wall to find 3 Vorthen guards waiting. The aliens were tall and thin, their bodies wrapped in robes of shifting darkness. Their faces were masks of pure white, featureless except for eyes that burned with pale fire. Just looking at them sent waves of terror washing through the human soldiers. Most species would have frozen. The Vorthan's fear projection was legendary, powerful enough to stop hearts and shatter minds. But the humans had trained for this. They had practiced moving through fear, fighting through panic, acting when every instinct screamed at them to run. Sergeant Chen fired first. Her plasma rifle sent a bolt of green light through the closest Vorthan's chest. The alien crumpled, surprise flickering in its burning eyes. Vorthan were not used to being attacked by frightened prey. The other two guards raised their hands, and the air became thick with terror. Private Morrison felt his heart hammering, felt his muscles turning to water, felt every nightmare he had ever had rushing back at once. He could see his mother dying again, could feel the heat of the house fire that had taken her, could smell the smoke and hear her screams. But he also remembered what she had told him before she died. Be brave, my son, even when you're scared, especially when you're scared. He raised his rifle and fired. The second Vorthan fell. The third tried to flee, tried to call for reinforcements, but Sarah Tanaka was faster. Her knife found the gap in its robes, and the alien collapsed in a heap of darkness and pale flesh. Wall secured, Chen reported through the comm. Beginning gate override. Down on the plains, Captain Marcus Cole watched the signal light flash from the wall top. The first phase was complete. Second squad covering positions, third squad on me. They moved forward at a run. The ground beneath their feet was harder than any stone on Earth, formed from the bones of species the Vorthan had exterminated long ago. Marcus tried not to think about what might happen to humanity if this mission failed. The main gate was a massive portal of black metal, covered in symbols that seemed to shift and writhe when viewed directly. As they approached, Marcus felt the fear press down on him like a physical weight. His father's voice echoed in his head, telling him he would never amount to anything. His drill sergeant at boot camp, screaming that he was too weak, too soft, too human to ever be a real soldier. He kept walking. The gate groaned as Chen overrode its ancient locks. Slowly, impossibly, it began to open. What waited beyond was worse than any of them had imagined. The inner courtyard of the Forbidden Fortress was filled with Vorthan. Not dozens, not hundreds, but thousands. They stood in perfect ranks, their pale faces turned toward the opening gate, their burning eyes fixed on the small group of humans who dared to enter their domain. At the far end of the courtyard, on a throne of crystallized terror, sat the Vorthan Emperor. He was ancient beyond measure, his robes so dark they seemed to absorb the light around them. When he spoke, his voice echoed not through the air but directly in the minds of everyone present. "Foolish humans," he said, "did you think we would not know you were coming? Did you think your pathetic bravery could breach our walls unseen?" Marcus felt his heart sink. They had walked into a trap. "We have observed your species since you first crawled from your oceans," the Emperor continued. "We have studied your fears, catalogued your nightmares. You are perhaps the most afraid species we have ever encountered. So much trauma, so much terror hidden in your minds. You should have been the easiest to break." He leaned forward on his throne. "Instead, you resist. Why? What madness drives you to fight when you are so clearly outmatched?" Marcus stepped forward. His legs trembled, his hands shook, but his voice was steady. "Because fear taught us something you never learned." The Emperor's eyes narrowed. "And what is that?" "That we're never alone in being afraid. That everyone around us is just as scared as we are. And that together, scared people can do incredible things." He raised his hand and fired a flare into the sky. From every direction, more humans emerged. Not the 300 who had approached openly, but 3,000 more who had been infiltrating for days. They came from tunnels beneath the black stone, from hiding spots among the dead mountains, from positions they had held through fear and cold and doubt. The Vorthan Emperor stood, genuine surprise flickering across his ancient face. "This is impossible," he breathed. Marcus smiled. "Yeah, we get that a lot." The battle for the Forbidden Fortress had begun. The courtyard erupted into chaos. Plasma fire lit the darkness as human soldiers engaged the Vorthan forces from every direction. The aliens responded with waves of terror so intense that several soldiers collapsed on the spot, their minds overwhelmed by their deepest fears. But for every human who fell, 5 more kept fighting. Private Rodriguez found himself face to face with a Vorthan warrior, its pale mask inches from his own. Fear poured into him, showing him visions of his family dead, his world burning, his own body torn apart by these monsters. He screamed, not in terror but in defiance, and drove his combat knife through the alien's heart. Corporal Diaz led her squad through a side corridor, clearing room after room of Vorthan defenders. They moved like a machine, each soldier covering the others, never stopping despite the psychic assault that pressed against their minds. In one room they found prisoners from a dozen species, beings who had been held here for centuries, kept alive as sources of fear for the Vorthan to feed upon. "We'll come back for you," Diaz promised them. "Just hold on a little longer." Captain Marcus Cole pushed toward the throne, his personal guard fighting beside him. Lieutenant Tanaka took a hit to her shoulder but kept moving, her face white with pain but her eyes fixed on the goal. Sergeant Chen provided covering fire from a raised position, picking off Vorthan officers as fast as they could rally their troops. The Emperor watched it all with growing disbelief. In 2,000 years, no species had ever fought like this. Most armies broke and ran when faced with his warrior's fear projection. Those who did not run simply died, their hearts giving out under the psychological strain. But these humans kept coming. They were terrified. He could feel their terror like a feast laid before him, but they refused to stop. "What are you?" he demanded as Marcus approached the throne. "What kind of creatures fight when they are drowning in fear?" Marcus paused at the bottom of the steps. Around him, the battle raged on, but here at the center of the fortress, a strange silence had fallen. "We're survivors," he said. "Our world is a hard place. We've faced ice ages and plagues and wars. We've killed each other and built each other up again. Every generation inherits the fears of those who came before, and every generation finds a way to move forward anyway." He started up the steps. "You think fear makes us weak. You've built an empire on that assumption. But fear is the reason we're still standing here today. It taught us to work together, to protect each other, to never give up. It made us the most adaptable species in the galaxy because we had to be just to survive." The Emperor raised his hand and Marcus felt a tsunami of terror crash over him. He saw himself as a child, lost in the woods near his home, calling for parents who never came. He saw his first command, the soldiers who had died because of his mistakes. He saw Earth burning, saw his daughter screaming, saw everything he had ever loved being destroyed. He took another step. "How?" the Emperor whispered. "How do you resist?" Marcus reached the top of the stairs. "Because I've been afraid every day of my life. This is nothing new. This is Tuesday." He raised his rifle. The Emperor lunged forward, faster than any being his age should be able to move. His hand caught Marcus's throat, lifting him off the ground with terrible strength. The fear projection intensified until Marcus could barely think, barely breathe. "I will break you," the Emperor hissed. "I will take your terror and spread it across the galaxy as a warning. Humanity will be known forever as the fools who challenged the Vorthan and died screaming." Through the haze of fear, Marcus saw something the Emperor had missed. Lieutenant Tanaka, climbing the back of the throne with her wounded arm and her unbroken will. She had crawled through enemy fire, fought through the Emperor's personal guard, and pulled herself up the ancient throne while the alien's attention was fixed on Marcus. She pressed her rifle against the back of the Emperor's head. "Surprise," she said and pulled the trigger. The Emperor's grip loosened, and Marcus fell to the steps. The ancient Vorthan toppled, his pale mask shattering against the crystallized throne. Across the courtyard, across the fortress, across the entire planet, the Vorthan felt their leader's death like a physical blow. Their fear projection wavered, then failed entirely. For the first time in millennia, the aliens knew what it was like to be afraid. The human soldiers pressed their advantage. Without the psychic terror weighing them down, they fought with renewed fury. The Vorthan, unused to facing enemies who were not paralyzed with fear, began to fall back. Marcus struggled to his feet and activated his communicator. "All units, this is Cole. The Emperor is dead. Push them back. Take the fortress." The response came from dozens of squad leaders, a chorus of acknowledgments and war cries. The humans surged forward, room by room, level by level, driving the Vorthan before them. By dawn, the forbidden fortress had fallen. Marcus stood on the highest tower, watching the sun rise over the black stone plains. Beside him, Lieutenant Tanaka sat with her shoulder bandaged, a tired smile on her face. Below them, human soldiers were freeing the prisoners, treating the wounded, and securing the Vorthan weapons caches. "We actually did it," Tanaka said quietly. Marcus nodded. "Now the hard part starts." "What do you mean?" He turned to look at her. "Word of this will spread. Every slave world in the Vorthan Empire will hear what happened here. They'll see that their masters can be beaten, and they'll start to hope." He looked back at the sunrise. Hope is dangerous. It makes people fight when they should stay quiet. It makes them sacrifice when they should survive. The Vorthan are going to be more desperate than ever, and the species they've oppressed are going to look to us for leadership. Can we give it to them? Marcus thought about the soldiers who had died in the battle, the families who would never see their loved ones again. He thought about Earth, still vulnerable, still a target for Vorthan revenge. He thought about all the things that could go wrong. "We don't have a choice," he finally said. "We started this, now we have to finish it." The communicator on his belt crackled to life. "Captain Cole, this is Relay Station Terra. We're receiving transmissions from across the sector. Ships are launching, sir. Not Vorthan ships, ships from the slave worlds. They're heading to rally points." Marcus closed his eyes. "It's beginning." "What do we do, sir?" He opened his eyes and looked at the sun. "We tell them we're coming, and we don't stop until every world in this galaxy is free." Lieutenant Tanaka stood up beside him, wounded arm or not. "Then we better get started." Together they walked down from the tower, toward whatever came next. The news of the Forbidden Fortress's fall spread across the galaxy faster than light itself could travel. Quantum communication relays carried the message from system to system, world to world, species to species. In the space of 3 days, every civilization in the Vorthan Empire knew that humans had done the impossible. The reactions were as varied as the species themselves. On the water world of Pelos 7, the aquatic Kalari heard the news in their deep-sea cities and gathered in stunned silence. For 800 years they had paid tribute to the Vorthan, sending their young to be taken as slaves, watching their culture slowly die under the weight of constant fear. The oldest among them, a matriarch who remembered when their people had still been free, began to weep. "It can be done," she said through her tears. "It can actually be done." On the forest moon of Vestes, the insectoid thornlings received the transmission in their vast hive networks. They had been conquered so long ago that freedom was barely a concept in their collective memory. But something stirred in the deep places of their consciousness, a long-dormant instinct toward independence. The hive queens convened for the first time in 5 centuries. What they discussed, no outsider would ever know. But within hours, thornling warriors began emerging from their tunnels, testing weapons that had not been used in generations. And on Earth itself, the population watched the news feeds in a mixture of pride and terror. Their soldiers had won a battle that everyone said was unwinnable, but now the Vorthen knew where humanity lived, and there would be consequences. Captain Marcus Cole knew all of this as he stood in the communications center of the captured fortress. Banks of alien equipment surrounded him, devices that had once coordinated an empire of fear. Now they would serve a different purpose. "Is the broadcast ready?" he asked. Specialist Kim nodded from his station. "Yes, sir. We've piggybacked onto the Vorthen communication network. When you give the word, every inhabited world in the galaxy will hear your message." Marcus took a deep breath. He had never been much of a speaker. He was a soldier, trained to fight, not to inspire. But sometimes war demanded more than weapons. "Activate the broadcast." A light flickered on, and Marcus knew that billions of beings were now listening. "My name is Marcus Cole," he began. "I'm a captain in the United Earth military. 3 days ago, my soldiers and I did something that everyone said was impossible. We stormed the Forbidden Fortress and killed the Vorthen Emperor." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "I'm not going to pretend it was easy. Good people died. Brave people. They gave their lives because they believed in something bigger than themselves. They believed that fear should never be a reason to surrender, that terror is not the same as defeat, that hope is worth fighting for." In the communications center, his soldiers had gathered to listen. Lieutenant Tanaka stood near the door, her arm in a sling, her eyes fixed on her captain. "I know what you're thinking," Marcus continued. "You're thinking that you can't do what we did, that humans are different somehow, braver or stronger or crazier. But that's not true. We're just as scared as you are. Every one of my soldiers was terrified when they approached this fortress. They fought through nightmares and panic attacks and visions of their own deaths. They didn't win because they weren't afraid. They won because they refused to let fear make their decisions for them." He leaned closer to the transmitter. "The Vorthen built their empire on a lie. They told you that fear was the end, that once you were afraid, you had already lost. But fear is just a feeling. It's a message from your brain telling you to be careful. It doesn't control you unless you let it. Every species in this galaxy has lived under the Vorthen's shadow for too long. You've watched your children taken as slaves. You've felt your cultures crumble. You've forgotten what it means to be free. But freedom isn't something that can be taken away forever. It lives in your hearts, waiting for the moment when you decide to stand up. That moment is now." Marcus stepped back from the transmitter, his message delivered. The light flickered off. For a long moment, there was silence in the communications center. Then Sergeant Chen spoke up. "Think anyone actually heard that?" As if in answer, the communication boards began to light up. Transmissions poured in from across the galaxy, messages in 100 languages and 10,000 dialects. Some were declarations of support. Some were pleas for help. Some were simple words of thanks from species who had forgotten how to hope. And some were military communications, encrypted channels carrying reports of rebellion spreading across the Vorthen Empire. "They heard," Tanaka said quietly. Marcus nodded. "Then we better be ready to help them." The next weeks were a blur of activity. Human reinforcements arrived from Earth, bringing weapons, supplies, and fresh troops. The captured fortress became a command center for the growing resistance, its facilities repurposed to coordinate operations across dozens of star systems. Other species began to join the fight. The Kalari sent their elite swimmers, aquatic warriors who could infiltrate underwater facilities that even humans couldn't reach. The Thornlings contributed their vast numbers and their knowledge of the Vorthen's weakest points. Even the Praxis, a species of energy beings who had been neutral for millennia, announced that they would provide intelligence support. But it wasn't enough. Marcus stood in the war room, studying the holographic map of the galaxy. Red dots marked Vorthen strongholds, far more than the Resistance could hope to challenge. Blue dots showed friendly positions, scattered islands in a sea of red. "We're still outgunned," he admitted. "The Vorthen have thousands of ships, millions of soldiers. We've hurt them, but we haven't broken them." Admiral Chen, who had arrived to take overall command of the human forces, nodded grimly. "And they're regrouping. Our intelligence indicates they're planning a massive counterattack. They want to make an example of Earth." "How long do we have?" "Maybe 3 months, 6 if we're lucky." Marcus turned away from the map. "Then we need to find their weakness. The Emperor wasn't just a leader. He was the source of their psychic power. With him gone, their fear projection is weaker. But there must be something else, something we're missing." The answer came from an unlikely source. One of the prisoners freed from the fortress was an elderly scholar named Zephyr, a member of a species that had been among the first to fall under Vorthen rule. He had been kept alive for 2,000 years, a living repository of historical knowledge that the Vorthen used for their own purposes. When he learned what the humans had done, he asked to speak with their leaders. "You have courage," Zephyr said, his voice thin and wavering. "But courage alone will not win this war. The Vorthen have secrets, young ones, secrets they have guarded for millennia." Marcus leaned forward. "What kind of secrets?" Zephyr closed his eyes. Before the Vorthen became what they are, they were different. They were explorers, scientists, dreamers, but they found something in the dark spaces between stars, something that changed them. What was it? A way to harvest emotion, to turn fear into power. But the process is not natural. It requires a focus, a device of incredible complexity. Without it, the Vorthen would be just like any other species. "Where is this device?" Zephyr opened his eyes. "That is what they have hidden most carefully, the location of the heart of fear." The name hung in the air like a shadow. "If you can find it," Zephyr continued, "if you can destroy it, the Vorthen will lose their greatest weapon. They will be vulnerable, mortal, afraid." Marcus stood up. "Then that's our mission. Find the heart of fear and destroy it." "It will not be easy," Zephyr warned. "The heart is hidden in a place no living being has ever returned from, a region of space so dangerous that the Vorthen themselves fear to enter it. They call it the Abyss of Sorrows." "Of course they do," Tanaka muttered. Marcus smiled grimly. "Good thing we're experts at going places we're not supposed to go." The preparations took 6 weeks. In that time, the resistance fought a dozen defensive actions, holding back Vorthen attacks while the main strike force was assembled. Casualties mounted, but so did the number of species joining the fight. Finally, the fleet was ready. 12 ships, the best humanity and its allies could muster, crewed by volunteers who knew they might never return. Marcus stood on the bridge of the flagship, the UES Defiant, watching the stars streak past as they entered hyperspace. "Coordinates locked in," the navigator reported. "We'll reach the abyss in 72 hours. Marcus nodded. "All hands, this is the captain. What we're about to do will determine the fate of this war. The Vorthen believe the abyss is impenetrable. They believe no one would be crazy enough to enter it. They've never met humans." He allowed himself a small smile. "Let's prove them wrong again." The Abyss of Sorrows lived up to its name. As the fleet emerged from hyperspace, the sensors immediately began screaming warnings. Space itself seemed wrong here, twisted and torn by forces that defied normal physics. Radiation levels spiked and fell randomly. Gravity waves rippled through the ships, threatening to tear them apart. And then there were the whispers. Every member of the crew heard them, voices in their heads that spoke their deepest fears and darkest secrets. The whispers promised pain, promised death, promised that their mission was hopeless and their sacrifice would be forgotten. 2 ships turned back within the first hour. Their crews simply couldn't take it anymore. Marcus didn't blame them. He was barely holding himself together. But the remaining 10 ships pressed on. "Navigation is almost impossible," the helmsman reported, sweat running down his face. "The stars keep moving, Our instruments can't get a fix on anything." Marcus studied the chaotic display on the main screen. Zephys had given them rough directions to the heart of fear, but in this madness, rough directions meant almost nothing. "Trust your instincts," he ordered. "The Vorthan found this place once. We can find it again." Lieutenant Tanaka, who had insisted on joining the mission despite her still healing injury, pointed at the screen. "There, that darkness." Marcus looked where she was pointing. Among the chaos of twisted space and alien radiation, there was a patch of absolute nothing. No light, no energy, no readings of any kind, just emptiness. "That's not normal space," the science officer said. "That's something else entirely." "The heart," Marcus breathed. "It has to be." They approached carefully, the whispers in their heads growing louder with every kilometer. 3 more ships fell behind, their crews too overwhelmed to continue. But 7 made it to the edge of the darkness. "Sensors can't penetrate it," the science officer reported. "I don't even know if we can pass through safely." Marcus looked at his crew. Their faces were pale, their eyes haunted by whatever the whispers were showing them. They had pushed themselves to their absolute limits. "I'm not ordering anyone to follow me," he said, "but I'm going in." The Defiant entered the darkness alone. What lay beyond was not what any of them expected. Instead of more chaos, they found calm. A sphere of ordinary space, untouched by the madness outside. And at the center of that sphere, floating like a jewel in the void, was the heart of fear. It was beautiful in a terrible way. A crystal the size of a small moon, pulsing with inner light that shifted through colors human eyes had no names for. Marcus could feel its power even from this distance, a weight pressing against his mind that made the whispers outside seem like friendly conversation. "That's it," Tanaka said. "That's what gives them their power. Can we destroy it?" The weapons officer ran calculations. "Our weapons might scratch the surface. To actually destroy it, we'd need to deliver a warhead directly to its core." "And getting to the core?" "There appears to be a passage, an entrance of some kind, but our sensors show it's heavily defended, not by Vorthan, by something else." Marcus made his decision. "I'll go, myself and a small team. Everyone else stays with the ship." "Sir, that's suicide." "Maybe. But if we came all this way just to turn back, then everyone who died to get us here died for nothing." He selected 5 volunteers. Tanaka, of course, who wouldn't have stayed behind if he ordered her at gunpoint. Sergeant Chen, whose steady hand and calm demeanor had saved countless lives. Private Rodriguez, who had grown from a scared boy into a reliable soldier. Corporal Diaz, whose quick thinking had saved the mission more than once. And Dr. Yuki, a field medic who insisted that someone needed to patch them up when things went wrong. They boarded a shuttle and flew toward the crystal. The entrance was a portal of pure darkness, a doorway into the heart itself. As they passed through, the pressure on their minds increased tenfold. Marcus saw himself as a child again, lost and afraid. He saw his failed marriage, his estranged daughter, every mistake he had ever made. He saw Earth burning, humanity enslaved, everything they had fought for destroyed. But he kept walking. The interior of the heart was a maze of crystalline corridors, each one filled with traps and guardians left behind by whoever had created this terrible device. They fought constructs of solidified fear, beings that existed only to protect the heart's core. They solved puzzles that tested not their intelligence, but their ability to think clearly while drowning in terror. And slowly, painfully, they made their way deeper. "How much farther?" Rodriguez asked, his voice hoarse. "I don't know," Marcus admitted, "but we can't stop now." They lost Dr. Yuki to a trap that none of them saw coming. A pit opened beneath her feet, and she fell before anyone could catch her. Her scream echoed through the corridors for what felt like forever. Corporal Diaz was next, taken by a guardian that appeared from nowhere and vanished just as quickly. One moment she was there, the next she was gone, only a splash of blood marking where she had stood. The survivors pressed on. There was no other choice. Finally, after what felt like years, they reached the core. The center of the heart of fear was a chamber of pure light, so bright that they had to shield their eyes. In the middle of the chamber sat a control panel of alien design, clearly meant to be operated by beings very different from humans. And standing before it was a Vorthan. Not just any Vorthan. This one was ancient beyond measure, older even than the Emperor had been. Its robes were white instead of black, and its eyes burned with a light that held no malice, only infinite sadness. "So you have come," it said, its voice like wind through dead leaves. "The species that does not break." Marcus raised his weapon, but the ancient Vorthan made no move to attack. "I am the keeper," it continued. "I have guarded the heart since before your kind crawled from the seas. I have watched my people change, seen them become monsters, and I have waited." "Waited for what?" Tanaka demanded. "For someone brave enough to end it." The keeper moved aside, revealing the control panel. "I cannot destroy the heart myself. It is bound to me and I to it, but you can. You who fear and yet fight. You who tremble and yet do not fall. You have proven what I have always hoped. That fear does not have to lead to cruelty. That terror can be overcome by courage." Marcus approached the panel. "How do I destroy it?" "Place your hand upon the crystal, let it see your fear, and then choose to reject it." It sounded simple. Marcus knew it wouldn't be. He placed his hand on the control panel, and the world disappeared. He was in darkness, complete and absolute, and then the visions began. He saw every fear he had ever known, every nightmare that had ever haunted him. He saw himself failing, dying, losing everyone he loved. He saw humanity destroyed, the galaxy enslaved forever, hope extinguished across the stars. And underneath it all, he felt the heart trying to break him, to convince him that resistance was useless, that fear was the only truth, that nothing he did would ever matter. For one terrible moment, he almost believed it. But then he heard voices, not whispers of fear but memories of courage. His daughter saying she was proud of him, his soldiers cheering as they took the forbidden fortress. Lieutenant Tanaka telling him they could do the impossible because they didn't know any better. And he remembered what he had said to the Vorthan Emperor. "Fear is Tuesday." He opened his eyes, his hand still on the crystal, and he chose. "No." The word echoed through the chamber, through the heart, through the fabric of reality itself. The crystal began to crack, light spilling from the fissures like blood from a wound. The keeper bowed its head. "Thank you," it whispered, "at last." "Everyone out," Marcus shouted, "now." They ran. Tanaka grabbed his arm and pulled him along when his legs threatened to give out. Sergeant Chen covered their retreat, firing at the collapsing walls. Private Rodriguez carried fallen debris from the path, clearing the way. They reached the shuttle just as the heart of fear exploded. The shockwave sent them tumbling through the crystal sphere, through the darkness, through the chaos of the abyss itself. When they finally emerged into normal space, the fleet was waiting for them, having held position for 3 days while they were inside. But time moved differently in the abyss. What had felt like hours to Marcus had been 3 weeks to the galaxy outside. And in those 3 weeks, everything had changed. The destruction of the heart of fear was felt across every Vorthan ship, every Vorthan world, every Vorthan mind. Their psychic power vanished in an instant, leaving them confused and vulnerable. The fear they had projected for millennia reflected back on them, and for the first time, the Vorthan knew what it meant to be prey instead of predator. The slave worlds rose. On Pelos 7, the Kelari swarmed out of their ocean cities and overwhelmed the Vorthan garrisons. On Vestes, the Thornlings coordinated an attack so massive that the occupiers surrendered within hours. Species that had been at each other's throats for centuries united against their common enemy. By the time the Defiant returned to the captured fortress, the war was essentially over. Admiral Chen met Marcus at the docking bay, a rare smile on her weathered face. "You did it," she said. "You actually did it." Marcus shook his head. "We all did it. Humanity, the Kelari, the Thornlings, everyone who chose to fight despite their fear. The Galactic Council wants to speak with you. They're calling you the Liberator, the being who broke fear itself." Marcus thought about that. He thought about Dr. Yuki and Corporal Diaz, who would never see what their sacrifice had accomplished. He thought about all the soldiers who had died taking the fortress, all the ships that had been lost in the abyss. "I'm not a liberator," he said finally. "I'm just a man who was scared and decided to keep going anyway." Tanaka, standing beside him, laughed. "That's literally what a liberator is." The days that followed were strange and wonderful. The Vorthan Empire collapsed entirely within a month. Without their psychic advantage, the aliens were just another species, and not a particularly strong one. Many surrendered, asking only to be allowed to live in peace. A few fled into the deep spaces between stars, never to be seen again. And some, a precious few, asked to join the new galactic community that was forming in the Empire's wake. Humanity found itself at the center of this new order. Other species looked to them for guidance, for leadership, for an example of how to be brave when everything was terrifying. It was a responsibility Marcus didn't feel qualified for, but he accepted it anyway. Because that's what courage was, doing the right thing even when you weren't sure you could. The Galactic Council convened for the first time in centuries, with representatives from every free species taking their seats. When they asked humanity what they wanted in return for their sacrifices, the human delegation had a simple answer. "Peace," Ambassador Chen, no relation to the Admiral, told them. "Not just for us, for everyone. A galaxy where no species lives in fear of another, where courage is rewarded and tyranny is opposed, where every being has the chance to reach for the stars without being afraid of what they might find there." The other species looked at each other. What the humans were proposing was unprecedented. It would require trust between races that had been enemies for millennia. It would mean sharing resources and knowledge and power. It would mean being brave. One by one, the representatives stood and pledged their support. The Kelari matriarch, tears streaming down her face. The Thornling queen, her mandibles clicking in what passed for a smile. Even a young Vorthan, one of those who had chosen peace, rose and added her voice to the chorus. When it was done, the galaxy had changed forever. Marcus watched the proceedings from a gallery above the council chamber. Beside him stood Lieutenant Tanaka, now Colonel Tanaka, and the other survivors of their mission to the heart. They had been offered high positions in the new government, honors and titles, and all the recognition they could want. They had all declined. "So what now?" Rodriguez asked. He was a sergeant now, decorated more times than he could count, but still the same scared kid who had raised his hand before the assault on the fortress. Marcus thought about it. For months, his entire existence had been focused on the war. Now that it was over, he wasn't sure what to do with himself. "I think I'm going to go home," he finally said. "See my daughter, try to be a better father than I was a soldier." "You were a pretty good soldier," Tanaka pointed out. "Then imagine what I might accomplish as a dad." They laughed, and for the first time in years, the laughter wasn't tinged with fear. The galaxy wasn't perfect. There were still problems, still conflicts, still moments when fear threatened to overwhelm everything. But now there was hope too, a belief that no matter how dark things got, courage could light the way forward. And whenever someone felt afraid, whenever they wondered if they had the strength to keep going, they remembered what a small group of humans had done. They had faced their fears and refused to be broken. They had stormed a fortress that everyone said was impenetrable. They had destroyed a weapon of terror that had haunted the stars for millennia. And they had proven, once and for all, that the greatest power in the universe wasn't fear. It was the courage to stand up anyway. Captain Marcus Cole retired from military service 3 months after the war ended. He returned to Earth, to a small house in the mountains where his daughter had agreed to give him another chance. They spent long evenings talking about everything he had missed, everything he wanted to make up for. On the mantel of his fireplace, he kept 2 things: a medal from the Galactic Council honoring his service in the Liberation, and a simple piece of crystal, a fragment of the heart of fear that he had kept as a reminder. A reminder that fear wasn't the enemy. The enemy was letting fear win. And humanity, for all its flaws and weaknesses and terrified stumbling through the cosmos, had never been very good at letting anything win. That, more than anything, was their gift to the galaxy. Not the absence of fear, but the courage to keep going in spite of it. Human soldiers had stormed the Forbidden Fortress, and in doing so, they had shown the universe that Valor could expose any enemy's weakness, overcome any obstacle, and light the way to freedom. Not because they were fearless, but because they were afraid and they fought anyway. And that made all the difference.